Hey everybody, and welcome once again to Nose in the Book, a Bible reading commentary with me, your host, Pastor Justin Van Reed. We have some great chapters before us today. Genesis chapter 17, Nehemiah chapter 6, Matthew chapter 16, and Acts chapter 16. We're going to see a connection here around circumcision, connecting Genesis 17 with Acts chapter 16. So kind of interesting how that lined up in the readings for today. But let's take a look here at what we've got. Genesis chapter 17 here is God once again coming to Abraham, and this time he gives him the sign of circumcision, the covenant of circumcision. And so circumcision is going to be this mark of covenant faithfulness of Abraham and his descendants. And so Abraham is going to have Ishmael circumcised, later Isaac circumcised, and then everybody in his house he's going to have circumcised as a mark of this covenant. Now, I think that the reason for this kind of mark, if you're wondering why would this be chosen, is because of the nature of it, pointing to what God is saying. Because in this chapter, what else is God talking about? Abraham's descendants. And so it's the offspring, the seed of Abraham, that is important here, in that God is choosing Isaac. He promises to bless Ishmael, as we talked about last time, but his focus is on Isaac, is going to be the one through whom God is going to continue the line of Abraham, the line of blessing. And it's going to come through Sarah, not through Hagar. And so God makes that very clear, even though Abraham and Sarah are in their old age. They are still going to have this son, and they are going to have this son that ultimately becomes a great nation. And so in light of the focus on offspring, on the descendants, on seed, that's why God, I believe, begins here with circumcision and makes this covenant of circumcision. Now, we'll come back to that in a moment here in Acts chapter 16, that topic. But first, Nehemiah chapter 6. And in this chapter, Nehemiah chapter 6, we have more threats from Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, and they're continuing to oppose Nehemiah, continuing to oppose the work of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. We read in this chapter that Nehemiah does finish the work, though. And there's lots of threats. They keep coming to him, keep threatening him, keep coming to him, and he won't give up. He won't stop the work. They threaten his life. They send a messenger to tell him they're going to kill him. And still he won't give up the work, and he finishes the work. He says in 52 days, I believe it is, and it's incredible because he points to the fact that this is because it was God that was doing it, and so here's Nehemiah, an example of what God often calls his people to be, to trust him for the victory. Trust, right? Here's what God has called you to do. All right, now trust God with the result. And don't fear, right? Be strong and courageous, right? That's what God says to Joshua and and to that generation in the wilderness going into the promised land. Be strong and courageous. You're going to have the victory. Here, Nehemiah, be strong and courageous. You're going to have the victory. Trust the Lord. Don't give in to your enemies and their threats. And Nehemiah refuses to. He has great faith. Trust the Lord. Doesn't give in to the enemy's threats. It's like Joshua and Caleb entering into the promised land with the other spies. What is the Lord? What are these people against the Lord, right? What is Sanballat and and Tobiah and Geshem, what are they again in comparison to the Lord? And so Nehemiah completes the work there of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. Flipping over the New Testament, we have Matthew chapter 16 and Acts chapter 16. And in Matthew chapter 16, first of all, you have Jesus here, and this great. I want to focus on the end of the chapter primarily, but earlier in the chapter, they get in this boat. Jesus talked about the yeast of the Pharisees. I just always love this passage because the disciples are like, he's talking about bread. Did you bring the bread? He's mad because we forgot the bread, and because Jesus is talking about yeast. And here they just had the feeding of the 5,000, just had the feeding of the 4,000. Now they're in the boat. They got no bread. Everybody forgot to bring bread, and they're like, Jesus is mad at us because we forgot to bring bread. And Jesus says, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the yeast of the Pharisees. And then they go, oh, and then they get it, kind of. But then right after this, you do have this scene where they do get it. Well, at least Peter, speaking on behalf of the people, kind of gets it. Who do people think that I am? And Peter gives the various answers. And then Jesus says to Peter directly, who do you think that I am? Who do you guys think that I am? And Peter says, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And it's a great statement. But of course, what does Peter mean by it? What is Peter looking for in a Christ, in a Messiah? Because right after that, Jesus says, yeah, you're right, and we're going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to die. And clearly that's not the idea that Peter had for Messiah, for Jesus, for the Christ. And so he says, no, this will not be so. And this is where Jesus has this famous statement, get behind me, Satan. Because where Peter's focus was on was this military victory, right? Wait, Messiah is king, the anointed king from David. You're going to go, and you're the Son of the living God. The Son of God doesn't die. The descendant, the king from David doesn't die. We go to Jerusalem. We have victory. We overthrow the Romans. We restore things. Restore the kingdom to Israel. And of course, Jesus says, no. This is not the plan that God has. The plan is for me to lay down my life. And then he calls his great famous passage here, calls his disciples, likewise, followers. If you're going to follow Jesus, what does Jesus say? Is it victory and physical victory? Is it going to be this life of, yeah, we're going to win. Yeah, it's all going to go well. No, Jesus says, you got to lay down your life. You got to be a servant of all. You got to pick up your cross. You got to die. You got to be willing to die. And that's what it looks like to follow Jesus, to say, God, you're number one. Your will is number one. And I'm willing to face whatever in this life. I'm willing to lay down my life. I see that faith in Nehemiah, that kind of faith that says, my eyes are focused on the Lord. I'm steadfast on the Lord, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. And that's what Jesus is calling his followers to. Not, it's going to be great. It's going to be victorious. It's going to be, we're going to win every battle here. But rather, you're going to, just like Jesus is going to Jerusalem to die, so he calls his followers, come follow me, come and die. Come and give up your rights. All right, interesting connection here with that. Come and give up your rights. This past, in 2020, there was a lot of talk about rights, and we had this whole pandemic on, we had this discussion about masks and all of this kind of thing. And really fascinating here, Jesus says, come and give it up. Give it up. That's what it looks like to follow me, for the sake of others, for the sake of the kingdom of God, for the sake of good of others. And we turn to Acts chapter 16, and this is just fascinating opening to this chapter. This is where Paul begins his second missionary journey. Paul brings Silas along because of his split with Barnabas, so he brings Silas along. And in the second half of the chapter, I'll just mention briefly, is where they go to Philippi and they're arrested. You have this great scene where Paul and Silas, it says, they're beaten, they're thrown in jail, and what are they doing? They're praying and singing hymns. Typical Paul, right? To live as Christ, to die as gain. So it's like, oh, we're in jail. Okay, let's pray, call out to the Lord, and we're going to sing, blessed assurance. But at the beginning of this chapter is where I really want to focus on here. Talk about picking up your cross and giving up your life here. Remember Acts chapter 15. What is Acts chapter 15 about? It's about the Jerusalem Council and saying, okay, the Jewish people, or the Gentiles, do not have to convert to Judaism in order to be saved. Okay, there's freedom here. Right? They don't have to follow food laws. They don't have to follow circumcision. Here comes our word again. Genesis 17, now back to Acts 16. Paul picks up Timothy, right? We talked about this a while ago. Paul comes to Lystra again on his second missionary journey. He picks up Timothy here, and Timothy's going to be this, his right-hand man for the rest of his ministry. What does he do? Remember, Timothy is only half Jewish, half Gentile. He's not been circumcised. His father's a Greek. Paul has him circumcised. Wait a second. Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council. Timothy has rights. He doesn't have to be circumcised to be saved. And Paul says, look, I'm willing to do anything. And Timothy, I assume here, is willing to go along and do anything so that there would not be any hindrance or stumbling block in the way here. He doesn't want the focus when Paul takes Timothy along and he's going to go minister to the Jewish people. He doesn't want to point at Timothy and say, hey, listen, Gentiles have rights. They don't have to convert to Judaism in order to be saved. Look at the example of Timothy. He doesn't want circumcision to enter into the conversation. He doesn't want this to be an issue. So Paul has Timothy circumcised, completely takes that issue off the table. It's a beautiful example for us. It says, yeah, He doesn't have to be circumcised, but Paul has Timothy circumcised and takes that fight away, takes that argument away, and now they can just talk about Jesus. Now they can just talk about the gospel. They're not fighting about circumcision. A beautiful example of Paul here and what he does through Timothy and bringing him along. All right, that's all we have time for today. Genesis 17, Nehemiah 6, Matthew 16, and Acts chapter 16. Hope you enjoyed these chapters in your reading. Hope that you're enjoying every day reading God's wonderful word. It's such a gift to us, and I'm grateful for it. I hope you are too. Until next time, keep your eyes on the Lord and your nose in the book. I'll see you again soon. Thanks.